Hey guys, what's up? It's Sean, Autotopia LA. Today we are back at the home of Ruffian Cars with my friend Chris Ashton. If you guys saw the Galaxy video, we talked about how there was 2 cars you guys brought to SEMA this year, which is extraordinary as both are. One of them would have been enough. So this is the second car. I noticed how you have a theme, like on your first 2 cars, you got the red that made its way into the striping and stuff.
Right.
And on this and the Galaxy,
it's the same yellow.
Are you gonna do 2 at a time this way?
I don't know. It was unintentional on the first 2, unintentional on these 2. Originally, this concept had a red stripe, but it's very difficult with red and green to not look like Christmas.
Did you start with 67?
Yeah, 67 Mustang Fastback. So this is our FIA, what we call our FIA Fastback Mustang. Yeah. And the intent here was to build a Mustang that was as much in the vibe of a Shelby Cobra FIA, which is my favorite Cobra.
You own one, you love that.
Yeah,
right?
I have a continuation Shelby FIA Cobra. We wanted to do something really similar. Like, what if we take that vibe and make a Mustang version of that, you know? So you'll see with the car that we have A, a lot of Cobra in it, and B, a little bit of European vibe to it. For some reason, both the Galaxy and the Mustang, like, I wound up being in the same mindset of being intrigued by these American cars that went and raced in Europe.
You seem like the kind, when you get inspired by a theme, the theme follows throughout. So this car, because I already know it's not like a full chassis car that's been put up into the rockers and all that stuff. It's still a subframe unibody car.
The theme was like a vintage racer, and in particular, we kept referring to it as a gentleman's racer. So one of the other things that we really wanted to do is everything that we've built was like really hardcore and maybe sort of a reaction to the Galaxy, which was the race car that is street legal.
Yeah.
We kind of wanted to go the other direction with this one and make it a street car first. It's a street car that's inspired by racing. It feels vintage, but it's tighter. The suspension's tighter, it's heim jointed. It's more modern stuff in there, but just enough. Right, like we still want it to feel like a vintage Mustang and look and sound like a vintage Mustang.
But like, so your rear on this, you're not still on leaf springs, are you?
Coilovers.
Yeah, okay.
It is a Watts link suspension, still a solid rear axle. But we get a little trick. With 15-inch wheels and tires, back in the day when they were running Trans Am, they ran a lot of negative camber. And it was because of the 15-inch wheels and tires. Like, the more sidewall you have, it seems like the more negative camber you want to run. So our rear axle has actually 1 degree negative camber on the rear tires, which is different. My 70 has the same rear axle, but no negative camber because I have 19-inch modern wheels and tires on.
Right, but with the 15s it allowed you. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Let's pop the hood too while because I want to see the front end. Is the front end framework still original Mustang?
Yeah, everything in here is original Mustang with the exception of this radiator core support. Yeah. This we rebuilt just because we were gonna go no grill in the front. And that's one of the inspirations from the Cobras. Right. I just love that you have this open mouth and then you just see radiator and you see oil cooler lines and oil cooler. Yeah. When you delete the grill, you see all the ugly behind it. All of this stuff, these inside panels, this radiator support, the mounts for the oil cooler and stuff, this is all fabricated.
So it's not as easy as, well, we'll just pull the damn grill off, because it's got, I can only imagine all the framework that you see, all the supports that you see for everything has got to be just awful.
Yeah, so that's all hand rebuilt, and that includes, you know, now you've got to make new bumper mounts and all of the trim mounts and everything has to all be redone. So
yeah, your coils all around, correct?
Right, coilovers all around, tubular control arms, upper and lower control arms with improved geometry. This car is running Thunderbird brakes, the Kelsey Hayes calipers.
There's a new one. Because
they're 15-inch wheels and calipers. The Thunderbird brakes, it's a bigger, heavier car. They're beefier brakes. So with Trans Am Racing, they actually switched to Thunderbird because they handled the heat better. Streeter Track puts this kit together, and it's really cool because the front rotors are 1.25 inches wide, which is just as thick as the ones on the Galaxy. big track stuff. But
done for a 15.
Done for a 15.
Because I gotta imagine for brakes, you're really limited running that small of a wheel. Correct?
Yeah, so we probably wouldn't have done the 15-inch wheels and tires if we couldn't put good brakes on the car.
Right.
We wanted to be vintage with this car. It's funny because it's a blend. We've got carbon fiber bits on the car, but then I'm talking about vintage and 15-inch wheels and tires, right? But it all works at the end of the day.
Yeah. What's the engine again on here?
This is another Shelby motor. So one of the things that keeps drawing me to Shelby is that they have aluminum blocks. And because we're so performance focused at Ruffian, saving weight in the nose of the car is just a huge priority for us. Like if you can save 150 pounds by going to an aluminum block and aluminum heads, like that makes a big difference.
And is that about the weight savings is somewhere between 100 and 150 pounds
right,
as an average?
If you consider what Ford would have had, which is an iron block, iron heads, It's 289 based. I really like the history of the 289s. They were a really kind of a legendary motor.
Definitely.
Having worked on the Galaxy where everything was like super tight, close tolerances, like it was a relief to come to this one and put a 289 in the engine bay and have room for the headers,
like
the
to be able to reach
tube,
down in and
change the spark plugs, all that stuff. It's a 289 block, and then it's bored and stroked. It's a 364 cubic inch motor now, so
badass.
It's a cool little small block. It still likes to rev. We've got a light flywheel in it, and then the Weber's, of course, is super snappy throttle response.
Yeah. So what's that, like in 500 range?
Yeah, just 500.
Yeah, but probably snappy and torquey.
Super snappy and just like fun to drive. Like, obviously if you're putting 15-inch wheels and tires on, you're not trying to get the optimum performance out of it. This is about style and it's about being cool. It also has to be functional, right? So again, the lightweight, the brakes, like everything works.
Yeah.
The intent was to be fun.
Question for you, the stacks changed.
Oh, right.
Just freaked me out when you popped the hood and I didn't see the Ultim, right?
So we have the Ultim stacks, but we don't have any sort of filtering on them. And so since we've been driving the car and putting a ton of miles on them, I just swapped the stacks out to these so that we can run these mesh filters. The Webers are so dialed in with this car that like there's maybe a little bit of popping on D-cell now than there was with the Ultim ones.
It's not a bad thing though.
But it's but it runs really good, so we're really happy with it.
Were those a bitch to tune?
I wouldn't touch Webers if it weren't for Augie Delgado. The guy's a wizard, you know, it's like one of those things, like he comes out, spends a day, works on the car, it fires right up, it idles immediately, it doesn't have to get warm. These are the race style Webers as opposed to the more street oriented ones. So they don't have a transition jet. So there's actually two jets. There's a low speed jet and a high speed jet. And when you open the throttle, it cuts between one and the other. So you'll feel it when you drive it. There's a bit of a dead spot in that transition.
Interesting.
Which I personally enjoy in my Cobra. You know, if you have a car for a while, even if it's a fast car and you drive it like daily, you sort of forget about the performance side of it. You start driving it like it's a Honda Civic.
Sure.
Like a normal person, normal car.
Yeah, of course.
The Webers don't let you do that. You got very light throttle, and then you've got like 3/4 throttle. So even cruising around town or whatever, you know, light turns green.
You're kind of getting after it.
You gotta drive it hard kind of all the time. So
this is gonna be fun today.
Yes, it would drive nicer with a set of Borla ITBs on it.
Yeah.
And it'd probably make a little more power. The vintage of the Webers is super cool. And also, like, I actually think that little bit of transition stuff adds to the personality of the car and makes it more fun to drive.
Well, and again, comes back to staying true to the theme. You know, you can get the full ITB look with fuel injection, but it's not going to have the charm. It's not going to have the feel, the flavor that you're going for with this car.
This is kind of built to my spec. One of the things we wanted to do with this car was build more for customers and be able to customize them for customers. So we kind of took this car, we did a breakdown and figured out what like the base model would be and what the options would be. And certainly if somebody wanted a 4-barrel, we could put a 4-barrel on there. If they wanted Borlas and fuel injection, you know, we could put that on the car.
Obviously you're not putting a Coyote in there, but.
Right, so that would be the thing for us is like kind of staying true to the vintage aspect of the car. Like we want to maintain the shock towers, which means small blocks. 289s, 302s, 351 Windsors, even LSs if people want to go that direction. Anything small block.
Come on back, you guys. Come on back. I know you. There's not even a question if it's a manual transmission.
Yeah, this is a TKX, which is the first. I usually have run a TKO. This is the first TKX, and it just handles more power. But 5-speed, again, we could have gone 6-speed, but there's certainly a point where you can shift too much. I've had a C7 Corvette that had a 7-speed manual in it.
Dude, I hear you. 7 gears at that point. Give me paddles, man.
Yeah.
And then what does that go rear end wise on this car?
It's a floating rear axle, which means that the bearings are on the outside of the housing instead of packed on the inside. So,
right.
so the axles don't carry the weight of the car. It's the housing that's carrying the weight of the car.
Got it.
So the thing is, they're 31 spline axles and they're really beefy, but because they're not also carrying the weight of the car, they're just propelling it forwards, you'll never break them. They're not carrying the weight of the car
right.
in addition. So that's the whole idea with a floating rear axle. That's why a lot of race cars run floating axles, is because it just makes them beefier. For the same diameter, they'll handle a lot more horsepower.
Got it. What'd you gear this one at?
This is a 389-to-1.
Yeah.
And it's a Torsen differential, which I really like because they don't have clutches, so they don't wear out.
I mean, I love the mechanical of what this car is, how it holds to what we're about to dig into, is the theme of what the hell the car was actually. Like, it's not a mishmash of like grabbing from this and grabbing from that and putting together a horrible pasta, you know? It's like, you know what I mean? It's like picking all the right flavors.
Yeah, I feel like this was the car I'm the most proud of building. It is I think the best executed on a theme and stick to that theme through the drivetrain, through the paint, through the interior, through all the components that are, you know, the way that it sounds, the way that it feels. Like, it's all super consistent on, on that theme. At the end of the day, it's just a really beautiful car.
Couldn't agree more, man. So before we close the hood, because the engine bay is glorious, point out again what all was made up front here.
Basically, this headlight bucket is original on both sides. This trim is original trim, minus where it's been cut out to go around the intercooler. Everything else is fabricated.
Wow.
I like to see the functionality of stuff. It was funny because at SEMA, a lot of people kept coming up and saying, I love that you kept the original hinges on the hood. And I was like, what? Like, that seems like such a weird thing for somebody to talk about. But then I realized that we're basically the only ones at SEMA that didn't have like fancy like billet hinges or whatever it may be.
It would look weird on this car.
It would look weird on the car because the theme is vintage, but also for me, like, the factory hood hinges work fine. Like, like, why do I'm not gonna go redesign something and replace something just because, like, I'm gonna.
Those have been working since the 60s, man.
Yeah. You can see while the hood's up also, you know, you would have a hood latch here, right? Which would also go into the hood. So all of this stuff is smoothed over. And then we took the time to cover some of these, like, just extra holes in the hood, just tidy them up, put some little speed holes in there. And then this is all customized to handle the hood pins.
So like this portion of the hood reinforced to give added structural.
It's funny because these hood pins, if you put them on like a carbon fiber hood or fiberglass, usually the fiberglass is thick enough to where they won't flex the hood too much.
Yeah.
But if you put these hood pins in like a single layer of sheet metal on your hood, these hoods from Ford are like 20 gauge steel, so they're pretty thin, and the metal will flex quite a bit. We always have to reinforce them anyway. So there's the outer skin that the outside's sitting on, but then there's an inner skin here, and then we'll take a piece of pipe and cut it and weld it in as a spacer.
So you're not worried about any flex, any damage to the paint, movement of the hood.
Right, because because we don't have another latch here, like those have to work, you know. These strut supports, we fabricated all of that stuff. The Mustangs had a ton of chassis flex. One of the areas that you have a lot of chassis flex is between the shock towers, and that's kind of common with any sort of car. So you see strut tower braces or shock tower braces on a lot of cars. So we fabricated our own here, but because we had the velocity stacks, we had to come forward of the velocity stacks.
Instead of going across.
And then because the bar has a bend in it, it would actually want to bend more that direction. It creates a weakness. So then you have to reinforce that weakness, which is why these braces here keep the bar from bending more. these bolts here go through to the coilovers. So that's where it's going to try to flex the chassis when you go over bumps and you put load into the suspension.
So then also where it's attaching here by the firewall, then that's all your addition there as well.
It is, that's all our bracketry. The back side of the firewall, which you won't be able to see behind the dash, is also reinforced. But what happens there is when you go over bumps or you're on the track or whatever, the frame wants to bend up. So we're keeping the shock towers from going together, but we're also keeping them from coming closer to the firewall. You'll also see, like on Mustangs, the firewall's really thin metal.
Is it?
On the brake pedal assembly, it will push through the firewall. They'll crack the firewall and eventually come through. Yeah. So you can see on this car, because we have the Webers, we don't have a plenum, which means we don't have vacuum, which means we have to run manual brakes. But because we don't have a brake booster, now we have room to put these support rods here that push basically from the brake pedal assembly, the backside of that, brace it to the shock tower.
That's so bitchin'.
That way you get a nice firm brake pedal and there's no flex and there's gonna be no cracking or anything in the future. So also when this is open, you can see we got these big brake ducts. We liked the idea of sort of the Mustangs that had the quad, like the 69s with the quad headlights, is just a cool look.
Sure.
Our thought was, well, what if the inside headlights are inlets, you know, for cooling the brakes? So this is 3D printed, this outer ring here, and then it goes into some ducts that go into the wheel well. Interestingly, like on my Mustang with the Willwood brakes on it, the brake calipers are at the back. With the Kelsey Hayes Thunderbirds, they're in the front, which meant that we can't just run this to the rotor in the front. We had to get it to the back of the rotor. So inside the wheel well is a 3D printed duct that runs inside the frame rail and then kicks it out to the back.
Take the air further back so it's not nailing the front of the rotor and the caliper itself.
Yeah, that way we can get proper brake cooling on it. So
God, dude,
there's a lot of engineering that goes into getting all of this stuff to package together and fit.
Yeah. My eye keeps going to your headers. It keeps going to the head. Does that come with the car, or is this something?
No, I built the
I knew it was
headers.
coming.
Yeah. So this is, I mean, these are a proud moment for me because my 70 was the first set of headers that I built, and they were MIG welded together, and they were pretty rough looking. They work fine.
Yeah.
But they're pretty ugly.
Yeah.
These are stainless headers. They're equal length, which mine were not on my 70s, and they're TIG welded. I think they look great. They fit nice. Equal length is no like small feet.
I've heard you explain it before, and it's fascinating to me.
Right.
And you gotta just love the plastic Lego pieces that you play with that get, I mean, I'm playing it down obviously, but I'm guessing same thing here. You get all the plastic piping going first so you know what you're gonna make.
Yeah. Ice Engine Works makes the header fabrication kits. They're plastic Lego blocks. And you can build them, and then you can basically count segments which show you the length of each primary tube. And if you make all the primary tubes the same length, then you get like optimum scavenging from your exhaust. So the issue is that the primary tubes at the front of the block, they have to travel the farthest to get to the collector, because the collector's behind the motor. So we established basically the length that the headers have to all be is by this first tube that gets run. So I run
Which would require you to do something like this, right? Where your fourth one back now, you have to add in extra tubing that doesn't really look perfect, beautiful. But I mean, it looks beautiful, don't get me wrong, but you know what I'm saying.
They're not. Yeah, if you see these headers loose or you look at them in the car, the tubes aren't all nice and parallel and everything. But it's because the rear tubes we have to take up some extra space somewhere. So they kind of get noodly to burn some extra inches so that they wind up being the same length as the tubes that are in the front of the car.
Yeah, I remember you running out the side. And are you oval tubing coming back here?
No, but we inset the exhaust into the floors and heat shielded everything. So it's the first time that I've done that. So on my 70, the exhaust is still mangled from loading it into like a shipping truck. You see it all the time, headers that are flattened on the bottom and exhaust. You know? So we just wanted to get away from that. So it's basically flush with the bottom of the chassis, the exhaust is.
So your chassis is still your lowest point on the car ultimately?
Ultimately, yeah.
As beautiful as all the metalwork is on the structural elements at the top of the radiator, it looks really cool to not see it actually.
Yeah, so the things that we were taking from the front, obviously the no grill, but if you were to see on my FIA, the oil lines go straight up. So So that's one thing we want, since it's all open, let's show off the oil lines.
Yeah.
All the oil lines and fuel lines in the engine bay are nylon braided, so they're black. But the ones up here are the only ones that are stainless because we wanted them to pop. You see the oil coolers, so the front valence and the bottom of the bumper are carved out where the front license plate mount would have been before.
Yeah.
But that's all carved out to make room for the oil cooler, and we had to carve out the back of the frame for the air to exit the oil cooler because it overlaps the frame. So we got all this together, and I was looking at it and I was like, it looks kind of empty, like what's missing? And then I realized that the running horse emblem from the Mustang grill was missing. So I was like, you know what? I went into my office.
Genius, dude, genius. When you just said that, I went, that would be awful without the horse.
Right, you have to have it, right? You gotta, it's a Mustang, you gotta have the running horse somewhere. Different companies will spray paint their logos in a radiator. And I was like, man, maybe we can just do a horse, do the Mustang horse, so.
Smart move, dude. Like, I get it, you could put your company name there and gross.
Right.
Just gross, just gross. Like, people know who's building the fucking car.
Right.
Sorry, guys, but like really. Kneeling down like that and the front view of it, it's such an aggressive looking front end with a level of elegance to it. I love, by the way, that, have you had any grief about it? Because we're not allowed to run yellow lights in California, are we?
I don't know.
Yeah,
but no.
They're white, they just look yellow.
Right.
Never mind, we'll leave that part alone, you guys.
No issues.
So let's go over to the obvious. Actually, we did leave out your beautiful spoiler that you created.
So front spoiler at SEMA, that was black and it was metal. And now it's carbon. So we were able to use the metal parts that we fabricated and get molds made and get them produced in carbon. So we'll be selling those soon on our website. So they're made.
Didn't you say they bolt right into the stock place that metal? Yeah.
So those bolt to the factory valence. Same for the side skirts will work on a car, and the hood scoop as well. We've done in carbon as well. So on the front valence, those turn signals there would have had a little insert bucket that would have gone in there. So we fabricated that to be all one piece. And then where the bucket would have sat, we used as a mounting point for a plexiglass cover. Yeah. Just because it's like in a lot of race cars, they would cover up the headlights with the plastic to protect it from broken glass.
Sure.
It's a really small detail. Most people miss it, but it's like super race car and cool.
Yeah, it is. Did you slope this one also?
We did, yeah. So you can definitely.
That's part of why it looks so aggressive up front, huh?
So the whole nose is 1 inch lower than original.
Where does the slope start from? Where do you start at?
It's about midway. It's about here.
You just take 1 inch out from here to here in height.
Like a pie slice, yep. And then the whole thing comes down.
Yeah.
Anything up front, the valence, bumper brackets, all of that stuff gets shifted down 1 inch, so you have to resolve all of that. But it makes it really aggressive, it makes it better aerodynamically, and especially since we're gonna cut the fender to do the fender flares anyway, then it makes it easier for the fender to flex.
Yeah.
One of the things that we were really happy with this car was that even though the car itself looked rough, the metal was really, really good shape. So it's all original Ford body panels. The hood, the door skins, the fenders. We didn't have to replace any of those with aftermarket stuff, which is awesome. Nice. The Ford steel is still better than the aftermarket stuff.
Yeah.
But then the stuff that we did add, the fender flares, the side scoop, it's all made hand done with the planishing hammer and English wheel, and then welded in and that sort of thing. So front and rear fender flares, those are almost 3 inches of width increase. So the car track's probably about 6 inches wider than it was factory.
I love this venting right here as well.
So that's another Cobra-esque. The Cobras have the side vents. They're not like tapered in the shape, and then the vents are straight. And so that's kind of like we start with it being inspired by something, and then we make it ours, and make it work with the car. One of the problems I was trying to solve with the vents is when I put the slats in, they were just flat pieces of aluminum. And at a certain point, when like you see up here, it looks like gills, and you go from behind it looks like gills. But if you line up with those vents, they almost go invisible. And so that's why I added the bend, so that they have some 3D shape. And when you look at them from straight on the side, they still look like gills, and then from the front and from the back. So they have some dimensionality to them, which is pretty cool.
Is this line radically sharpened, Chris?
It is sharpened a little bit. One of the things that we wanted to do with the side scoop was make that line just a continuous flowing line. It's actually surprisingly not on the original Mustangs.
I mean, it's crazy watching this line across the side of the car go all the way through the door, all the way through. I mean, it really does from your rear flare. It all really flows incredibly well.
The flares are similar to my 70, not quite as big, which is an adjustment that I wanted to make after living with that car for a few years.
Yeah.
But then it got tricky because we wanted to add this big side scoop to it, and we wanted to make it functional. If you're gonna look like a scoop, then make it a scoop.
Is that scoop feeding rear brakes?
Yeah, so that one goes to the rear brakes, and even though we don't necessarily need a lot of rear brake cooling, at least it functions now. It has a purpose.
I'm with you.
It's a little bit tricky to figure out how to make it meet up with the fender flare, and started looking at my GT40, and that has the side scoop and kind of goes into the wheel flare of that. So
yeah, I absolutely love what you did for a door handle.
Yeah, so we have something really similar on the Galaxy, which used International Scout tailgate buttons, but those specifically didn't have a key. Again, it was a race car, so you don't need to lock it. The priority here was street car. Alphaholics makes these. They're self-locking, so the locking mechanism is inside the push button. It's vintage, like push button Panteras or early Alphas or whatever. It's simple, it's a nicer shape than what the factory had, but functional is important. You can still lock the car up when you leave it.
And then, is it shadowed? It is shadowed a little bit. You're losing the drip rail, but still keeping a little of the metal there rather than pure shave, right?
Probably not gonna drive this car in the rain. We still kept the windshield wipers. We wanted it to be legal. I shaved this, kept a little of this shape, and we added it here, thickness, to continue it over into this shape. So what I was talking about earlier was like, if you're gonna have something that looks like a vent or a scoop, like make it function.
Yeah.
So the 67, 68s had a big square panel, a rectangular panel that had louvers in it. And the louvers are just, it's just a plastic insert.
Yeah.
They're not functional, which really bugged me. And so we were like, well, we're either gonna make louvers that work or we're gonna not have them. We could have put a differential cooler in there, but it was like, that's a lot of added complexity. We just don't need it. So if there's nothing for us to cool, let's just get rid of them. So the first thing I did was I patched it over with a flat panel. But then I had this big sail panel here that was just like empty and nothing to look at. And it really bugged me. And I was like, well, we can't do this. What if we make it look like a race car version of a window where they just filled it in, you know? So it looks like a window delete. And a lot of people think it is a window delete, but there was never a window on a 67.
No, there wasn't, but it looks like a quarter window that you did exactly what you just said, just fill it in with some metal and be done with it, you know?
In the back of the car, so we did, I guess, de-chromed it. It's flush mount glass by Fessler.
And then this to keep the race theme with it. The
we don't really need those with modern day like urethane glass adhesives and stuff, but it is very much a racing thing. So we actually didn't change very much in the rear, aside from there was a chrome trim that went up and over and at the top of this trunk, but then you would see color below the trim, which was a little bit funky when you have a blacked out taillight panel. So we de-chromed it. We have the push buttons again so we could get rid of our lock. We did our own gas cap. We flush mounted the taillight. So these are factory lenses, factory panel. We did do a little bit of filler around the edges to take up some of the gap, but basically we made mounting brackets inside of the trunk to hold the taillight lenses instead of the chrome outside ones.
Which gives us this flush look to your taillights.
So it's like fancy flush mount, but really there was not as much work in it as you would expect it to be.
I mean, your bumper's significantly top.
The Mustang bumpers, they gotta be some of the worst fitting bumpers in the industry. They'll have like a 2-inch gap on a factory original car. Like they're just so bad. If you're doing a Mustang, you're gonna make it look nice, you're gonna spend some time fitting the front and rear bumpers. That's just the reality of it.
Yeah.
We did some speed holes, some air holes in the back valence. Saves a little weight, and it also opens it up. If any air is trapped in there, that it'll come out easier.
And it looks cool because it exposes a bit of your fuel cell, I'm seeing there.
Yeah, so you see the fuel cell behind there where normally that would be hidden. We do have like dimple dyed holes like all over the car, and the air holes in the gas cap and stuff. So we sort of continue that sort of circular door handles. We continue that theme through a lot of the car.
And weren't you telling me, Chris, that the gas cap will be a part that you'll be selling, and that even though you've moved the bumper like you have, you've made it so that gas cap still goes in its stock position. So like it's not a big deal if somebody with a 67 or 8 Mustang buys that, it's gonna fit right on.
Bolts right on.
Is this the first car you've put Ruffian? I mean, it says it on the Mustang in paint, but have you ever done any
emblems? No.
You haven't done Ruffian yet, have you?
No, so every car has Ruffian on it somewhere.
Yeah.
We didn't want to yell it on the stripe. And I don't remember who told me, one of the guys that works for me, I think maybe it was Mikey, was like, Ruffian is the same number of letters as Mustang.
While you were saying that, I was just counting the letters, by the way. I swear to you.
And I was like, well, you know what that means. So
it's like no-brainer right there,
no-brainer.
dude.
So I took the Mustang font, I reproduced it on the computer. You can see that the letters are tilted out towards you as you're standing there looking at it. That's the way the original Mustang emblems are.
No, I get it. I'm a great designer, in my opinion, knows when to grab the reins and pull them a little bit and just slow the horse a little bit,
And that's, I think, one of the reasons why this car is the most beautiful car we've ever built, is because this is us holding back.
Can we pop the trunk? And
yeah.
I'm just curious to see.
So pretty simple, functional back here. It's a 22-gallon fuel cell in the back. We have our vent for the differential oil catch can there.
Yep.
We have an inline charcoal canister on the vent line so that I can park it in the garage and doesn't smell like fuel later.
I got you. It's funny because I hadn't really looked at the interior yet, Chris. I just noticed that it is a half-caged car, correct? Yeah. So half back all the way, caged through.
Just the back half, easy to get in and out of.
Sure.
If it's not very, very carefully designed, a roll cage in a street car is very risky.
Dangerous to your head, for sure.
So we want as much headroom as possible, so we just figured we'd just do the back half. We've got a fuel filter there on the line going to the carburetors. Of course, our battery. We have a cutoff here, a quick cutoff. So and then that's the anti-gravity battery. We've been running those in everything because I personally have a lot of cars that I store. The cool thing with the anti-gravity batteries is that they reserve enough to start the car one more time. So if you have a draw, if you leave the headlights on, if it's just sitting in your garage for too long, battery's running down, it gets to a point and the battery disconnects internally and says, nope, no more voltage for anything.
Yeah.
And then you have to actually press a button on the battery to reconnect it, and then you can start the car one more time. Your alternator's running and it'll be charging it back up.
Yeah. Is there any difference in weight on those at all?
They're super light.
Are they?
If somebody else bought this car and they swap out batteries or whatever, this is a normal battery size box, but inside is a tiny lithium battery. And so it only weighs like a couple pounds.
Oh, wow.
Trunk here, again, we can't leave well enough alone, and we wanted to make it look really tidy and add some speed holes.
The wind wing for the stock window is now gone.
We went to a one-piece door glass because we thought it would just clean things up and get rid of some of the stuff that's maybe a little clunky from the factory. Though in hindsight, wouldn't have done it.
You were explaining how you're a bit frustrated with the glass kit on here, and you might actually reinsert the wing.
At the end of the day, sometimes this is a great example where the factory stuff just works and works well. The door glass actually has a curve in it to match the body. It's very sort of a complicated shape. And then when you mix in there the angle that the sliders have to go in order for it, because this line is far behind this line, and if your window's inside of here, getting up to this pocket is difficult. And the wider you make the glass, the worse the problem gets. With this one piece, they look good, they mostly work, but they don't seal great. It was just a ton of time. We probably have 120 hours or more into just fitment.
And in the end, it's not even working as well as you would like it to work. So
we're still not super happy with it.
Got it.
That would be one thing where if we were to build another one of these cars for somebody, it's not even gonna be an option.
Even staying with your glass, because we're talking about glass, flush mount without these straps might have looked almost a little too modernizing of the glass.
It's cool that you picked up on that because we weren't planning on running those. Andreas, who works with me on the concepts, did a very accurate 3D model, with the right paint color and everything on it before we were done. It looked funky, like it actually looked like it was balding because you're used to seeing the chrome.
I mean, my eye was drawn to that moreover than it was not having any trim points.
Yeah, when we looked at the renders without chrome trim on it, it looked plain because there's really the glass is flush, this you don't see. So like there's just a lot of kind of nothing of interest. So I asked Andreas to add these back in, just look at my 70 and add them back in, and he did, and I was like, that's it. Like
That's it. I've been waiting to do this. I haven't opened one of these doors yet. This is like my favorite part of cars is always where you're sitting and driving or riding as a passenger.
Nice. Well, this one was a big departure for us because everything that we've done is race car. I drew a lot of inspiration from Singer. I love the way that they expose some metal and paint it, and then they mix in the soft surfaces, you know? So I kind of went the same route, and it just really works.
I honestly, I never noticed the color of your inner door here. This is beautiful.
So it's the same bronze that's on the wheels. We picked it out just out of a paint book to go with the green. It's way more expensive to do an interior like this and expose some of the metal than it is to just do full upholstery. Labor for cleaning up all the metal, planishing stuff, any wrinkles in the metal, and then you gotta body work it, you gotta paint it, you gotta sand it, you gotta polish it.
So your inner door panels, these are fully you guys, right? Like this is a totally different door panel.
Crazy thing, on the 67, 68s, this outer bit that's bronze here is just built into the door. And they actually have a textured fake leather print embedded in the metal. I really liked and thought it was super cool. It's just that we were gonna go put some upholstery in there, and it's weird to have like the fake upholstery and then the real upholstery right next to it. It's a little funky, so we just smoothed it all over and painted it.
So that's all this is just all the metal is as it was. It's just cleaning it up and changing the look. Yeah, wow, dude.
Auto Addiction OC did the paintwork on the car for me, and also they have a in-house guy, Victor, who does upholstery there. He did all the interior stuff, like, you know, to our spec. But this is a houndstooth insert. These are Bride, I think they're called Hystrix seats from Japan. They're really cool. The material was different, so we wanted everything to match, so we just recovered everything.
Yeah, I love that you kept the stock sill plate too.
It is, it's just a factory Ford sill plate. The only thing is that these screws will strip out real easily out of the factory stuff. They just go into sheet metal, so we have nuts that are welded in there that the screws go. So they're machine screws, so they're not coming out.
Yeah.
You can see the half cage here. So we kept a door bar going down, but we put the seats in, we figured out where the seats were gonna go, and then we built the door bars to the seats so that they work together. But it still goes far enough forward to brace the chassis and stiffen it.
Yeah.
This is also an inner rocker from the convertible, and then the seat riser. This bit here, it goes under the seats, goes from side to side and over the transmission tunnel. It's all Ford factory chassis stiffening that they did on the convertibles.
That you've added to the coupe to add more rigidity to your floor.
Because we're not doing a full cage, we wanted just any extra stiffness that we could get. Why not take what Ford did? Center console, tons of work in the center console, getting it to be smooth. So all that metal, it's all wrinkled and stuff. If you ever see one, just the way Ford made them, like they're not meant to be seen. It takes a lot of work to smooth all that stuff out.
So that's still stock center console, just cleaned up.
The tunnel, yeah. And then this little bit that we added here.
Under the shifter, that section
yeah,
there.
that bit there. One, we needed to be able to take the shifter off the transmission without taking the transmission out of the car. And then two, I needed a switch panel of some sort. It doesn't get more simple. It only has as many buttons and switches as the bare minimum required, right?
Yeah.
So turn signal switch, toggle.
That's what this toggle is your turn signals?
And then we have a horn.
That's your horn.
Yeah, and that's an arcade button from an arcade cabinet. So kind of just a little nod to my background in computer
career.
games. Yeah, they're so satisfying to click. So I was like, why not make it, why not connect it to the horn? So we've got those two. We've got the headlight switch and the windshield wiper switch and the ignition, and that is it.
That's really it.
So we wanted to cover the floors, like under the seats. It's snap in so it comes out, but we carry it up and over and under the spare tire that's back here. A lot of old race cars would have to have spare tires in them for whatever reason. The 67 has like a more like horizontal rear window than my 70 does, and it just felt like just a vast empty space. And so we started looking at like trophy trucks and how the spare tires are mounted on roll cage and everything, and basically made a mount and then leather straps to hold it in. The bride seats are low back seats, but then I want things to be safe. That means a headrest so you don't get whiplash. But on old race cars, even drag cars today, they'll attach headrests to the roll cage.
Sure.
So we realized if we attach the headrest to a cage.
Sorry, dude. I just noticed that that's not attached to the damn seat.
Right?
I just caught that.
Yeah, the headrests basically are floating off of the seats.
That's spectacular.
Because this is not attached to the seat, it also has to be adjustable. So the seat has mounting holes. You can move it forward, back. This has a quick release pin. And
so now you get to move the headrest in accordance with where you're putting the seat.
Plus, some people don't like their head pushed forward. And if you're wearing a helmet, suddenly you want the headrest to be back.
Dude, brilliant.
But if we take this bolt out here, the whole headrest comes off, and now you have room to get the spare
actually
tire.
access the spare if you ever needed it. But that just led me, because I never asked you about wheels and tires, and I know you're on a 15, so now I know you're also running a square setup again, aren't you?
Yes, that was one of the things we wanted to do from the very, very beginning. I love the Cobra wheels, and I especially love the back Cobra wheels because they're deep dish.
Yeah.
So my thought was, could we make a Mustang wide body use rear wheels front and rear? We had to jump through some hoops to make that work because you're kind of stuck with whatever you get for the front. And then you have to make the back match that. So the fronts actually worked perfect. We bolted those up and we needed about 2 3/4 inches of fender flare to cover it. But on the rear, they would be too far tucked in. So we actually have a custom rear axle that is wider to push the wheels out farther to match the offsets
rather than
of the
changing
fronts.
the offset of the wheel itself.
Exactly. These would have been deeper dish, but because we have a wider axle now, they're the same as the fronts.
15 by what are they?
15 by 9s, and we're running 295 50 15s in the back. We actually first put 295s in the front, but there's a weird thing that happens with your brain, especially with the nose drop of the car. The front of the car gets smaller. If the tire's the same size, it actually looks bigger in the front than in the rear.
Interesting.
So we went slightly smaller, not because we couldn't fit them. We went to 275s up front just because it just looked a little bit better.
And again, street car, not racing. You don't need the little extra grip that you're gonna get. Yeah. Can I sit down here? Is it quick release?
Go for
I bet it is,
It
right?
is quick release, yep. Of course.
Hold my steering wheel, sir.
All right, got it. This is a Cobra steering wheel, by the way, AC Cobra replica. So again, carrying with the Cobra theme.
Same with the wheels, right? It's a Cobra.
Yeah, these are American Racing.
Is the steering column, does the wheel still come to where it would have come, or is that?
It's telescoping with some tools. You can take the collars, loosen them, and then adjust it. So if we move the seat position for somebody, we can also move the steering wheel. These are classic instruments. They're Autocross series.
And so that is the look, that's the stock look if you buy that gauge?
This is actually their entire cluster. So this whole panel comes pre-assembled from them.
Sitting in here, obviously now looking at the dash, beautifully covered, but it's still a 67 dash.
We made some changes on here, like this bit down here is metal to line up to the dash. Obviously the radio is gone now, so that's gauges instead. Again, trying to keep it as simple as possible. Like I've never once driven my Cobra and thought, you know what I wish was in here? A radio.
I need a damn radio in here.
We'll be producing those now in billet and selling those. People could paint
this
them.
Center gauge cluster here. I take it as this is your knife maker friend?
Yeah.
On the shifter?
JR.
And that is wood, yes?
It is, yep. One of the things we wanted to do, you're having a tough time with a lot of this stuff up here, and here would be plastic on the original cars, and they warp and they don't fit and they rattle and stuff. So we just cleaned up all of the steel, made it to where we could finish it, but we kept the whole, so you can see these are Mustang recovered sun visors, but this is all Mustang bracketry and rear view mirror and stuff. That's all factory stuff, but the headliner is just glued to the underside of the roof.
Of the roof. Oh, yeah, yeah.
It's just cleaner and it tucks under the metal.
Plus that little odd depth that it gives to your eye is pretty cool, dude. But I love seeing all these factory elements, the rear view, the bracketry for your sun visors. I mean,
that's part of what makes an interior feel like a Mustang, you know, is having the Mustang dash, having the Mustang door panels.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want to forget what you're in.
yeah. All right, you guys, there's still more to talk about, believe it or not, on this car, but what we're gonna do right now is the part we've all been waiting for, which is to go for a ride, go for a drive, and get a sense of that as bitchin' as it looks, it's probably a better driver. So, drive time.
Awesome.
I see what you mean. So that's where that's the little flat spot you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like either stay below that or rev through it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. It's the IDAs. They don't have a transition circuit. For whatever reason, the tune on these, it's better than on my Cobra. It's more pronounced in my Cobra, but it's still here. But I think it gives it personality.
I got no problem with that. Come on.
The throttle response, it revs quick, huh?
Boy, does it just snaps quickly. Is that partly because of the Webers and the way they work?
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Drop down into the intake manifold and go along some runners, then get into the head and into the cylinder, and the Webers, it's just a straight shot, straight down into the heads.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's much less distance to travel. Each cylinder has basically its own carburetor, right? It's getting fuel per cylinder.
Right.
Instead of in a 4-barrel, the fuel's getting dumped in a plenum, and then the different cylinders share that fuel that's in the plenum.
Man, what a completely, dramatically, radically different car than the Galaxy.
Yeah, for sure. That's one of the things that we were so excited to go to SEMA, have two cars that felt like they were in the same family, but also so different, you know, with intent, you know, the Galaxy being a race car first and this being a street car first.
Yeah, yeah. And this engine probably comes alive higher up in the RPMs.
Really, I mean, anything above like 25, 28, anywhere above there, it seems really strong.
I mean, it seems ridiculously responsive. Where do you have your rev limiter set at?
I think it's like 6,400 right now.
Okay. And how many miles have you driven the car so far? Do you know?
We didn't have the speedometer hooked up for the first bit of it, so we're probably right around 400 miles.
Got it. And once again, you can go full lock to lock in your car, huh?
Yeah, big tires, fender flares, it's all good.
God dang, now I'm finding myself in love with that little flat spot. It like gives me an excuse to go, well, I had to get on it a little bit.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, boy, Chris, this is just, what a car, man.
Turn signals there, horn there, that's all you get.
Right. What game is this from again?
Just
any gaming
generic arcade machine. They all, you know, it's so satisfying, the little click on there. So it's even the same switch inside, but it works on 12 volts, so.
On your steering is really wonderful.
It's pretty decent, yeah. So it's a rack and pinion now instead of a steering box.
Right. I mean, I get the differences though a lot, dude. Like this still feels. It still feels semi-classic. Right. Like refined classic. I don't know how you term it, but there's.
It's kind of, for me, it's like what I imagine an old Mustang to be, but they never are.
Right.
Right. But this one is.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's not so far refined that now it feels like everything's modern components, a full frame.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely not a modern car. It feels different. It feels vintage, but it doesn't drive vintage.
No, it's like in between vintage and modern. I mean, it's like the way we're hitting bumps and stuff like that. We're not floating all over the friggin' place. You know what I mean? Wow. Oh my gosh, and those little pops. Boy, everything though, the ergonomics, you know, which isn't that something that'll drive you nutty? You get in a car and right away you sit in and you're like, I don't want to drive this.
Right.
You're reaching for the shifter or the seating position's too high, too low. I don't know, ergonomics are crucial to me. So proud of your team, what you guys are doing together, Chris. Yeah, like serious leveling up, man.
Yeah, this one for sure is one of the, you know, I love the Galaxy. Personally, I love driving the Galaxy. It's so extreme and so different.
Yeah.
But this is taking the old Mustang and just refining it.
It really is that. It's pure Mustang. It's just, you know, all the antiquated, scary shit's gone. But you really can just drive it too. Like you can street drive the car.
Right.
Louder than the Galaxy.
I know. Well, side pipes are a bit of it, but the Galaxy has a real muffler on it, and these are just the straight through mufflers.
Yeah.
Even though there's 4 of them.
I mean, I got no gripe on it. Don't get me wrong. I think the car sounds exceptional.
Yeah, I'm real happy with where it's at. I mean, it fits the race car vibe that it has.
Boy, it just snaps, man. But they're really four dramatically different cars, man. They just
like, even though this has the same chassis, it's got different wheels and tires than mine, which changed the whole attitude of it. And then the LS motor completely changes things.
radically.
And then this just has that whole vintage style. But it feels like a totally different, almost like different model and brand of car.
Yeah.
Completely different.
I mean, it's so dramatically different, dude. I think this is my favorite car you've done yet. Turn, no problem, and speed.
Yeah, it's good.
I like how it makes you smile too, man. It's one of the primary functions. You actually build your cars to drive rather than just look bitchin'. You're an enthusiast at heart, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, you become a builder, but at the heart, you're totally an enthusiast. Well, you guys heard me say it with Chris in the car. I think this is my favorite of the Ruffian cars. Now, I'll probably say that about every Ruffian car that ever gets built because you know I'm a massive fan of what they do. But really, just a truly spectacular car. I want to leave you guys with this. I've mentioned it a few times, but we are starting a podcast, Autotopia LA podcast. That channel will be a secondary channel on YouTube and then all the other places. I'm going to keep mentioning it so when we launch it, I want you guys to know. But as always, a massive thank you for hanging and watching. I know this one's a long one, but these cars of Ruffian Cars deserve the level of attention we're giving them. So I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, man. Later.